background really intrigues me. Just going from the film and entertainment space into the sports marketing space. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and where are there any parallels, if any, between the film and sports arena that you've taken into the Dodgers realm?
For sure. I think my path from entertainment to sports was sort of kismet. A lot of things just lined up and opportunities sort of unfolded. And originally I was a little worried about how one would translate to the other, but I think at the end of the day, the red thread between both industries is very much storytelling. And one of the things on the entertainment side, I focused on theatrical for a long time, and it felt a little Groundhog's Day-esque in that you're working on maybe 12 properties at the same time. A lot of them are new IP. If you're lucky, a handful are part of a series or franchise, but it's difficult of trying to, by the time that you build a brand of an independent theatrical movie, you're sort of done. It opens and you have only so much time to utilize those learnings, and then you sort of move on to the next project, which is in many cases a wildly different genre or picture or project, and it doesn't necessarily translate. So the notion of working on one brand season over season and such a storied and legacied brand, I think was interesting to me. But I almost think about it as the difference of trying to storytell a long-standing TV show season over season and trying to differentiate why this season will be different or why you should continue to tune back in. And I think that the storytelling element of theatrical and film and entertainment marketing is very much important to successful sports marketing. So that's been, I think, a tool in my toolbox from my sort of past life in entertainment that's been really helpful in the sports space.
And why the Dodgers? What brought you there? Like, what was the sort of hiring practice that you contemplated? What was sort of your strategy, or what did you want in the next phase of your career that aligned really nicely with the Dodgers?
Yeah, so I grew up in Massachusetts, and if you're from the Boston area, you're inherently a sports fan. It's just sort of a rite of passage. So I'd always grown up a sports fan and sort of made my way to Los Angeles for college. And during my time at UCLA, I'd sort of had my aha moment of, movies and film and TV had always been a passion of mine. And I'd always been sort of interested in advertising. And once I got out to Los Angeles, I sort of realized that there were careers in entertainment, and that became something I wanted to pursue. So started at Lionsgate Entertainment as an intern in 2011 during a pivotal time for the studio when they were working on the marketing for the first Hunger Games movie. And then, just kind of stayed. I dug my claws into that internship pretty hard and hung around long enough and was lucky to, be offered a full-time job and then sort of grew my career in Lionsgate, kind of coming up through the system, and eventually was overseeing digital media on our theatrical team and loved it and had an amazing experience in the film space. But it was coming up on my 8th or 9th year and sort of in my first job, and was just observing trends in the industry and how it was changing. And with the rise of streaming and sort of, the theatrical offering, not losing ground, but definitely being competed against with the streaming space, and just felt like I wanted to try on a new type of brand marketing for size and, diversify my own portfolio. And sort of at the same time that the Dodgers reached out trying to, fill a newly formed position overseeing digital marketing and strategy. And it sort of just felt like, oh, I wanted to try something different, and, what a cool opportunity and a legacy brand, and that I'm also passionate about. I, always have loved sports. So went for it.
Awesome. I love that you mentioned the change in live stream and really consumer consumption, right? Thinking about that, what are some of the challenges that you're facing within the sports marketing realm when it comes to Dodgers, when it comes to, is live streaming top of mind? Are you looking for more interactivity? What are some of those, and what sort of advice would you have for any of those pivoting challenges?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I feel like the circumstances that have arisen out of COVID have really just kind of exacerbated and shed light on areas of improvement we previously on. And I think timelines have maybe been accelerated in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have. But from sort of the top down within the Dodgers, I think our leadership and ownership collectively knows and feels like, we need to really start thinking as strategically as possible about reaching consumers where they are in sort of an ever-changing media landscape, and that, baseball is a legacy product, and that in order for us to really continue to offer the best version of that, we need to be more adaptive and more innovative in how we offer our sort of core product to new consumers, younger consumers who just fundamentally consume media in a really different way. Right. So that was kind of a big sort of marching order, and one of the main reasons that my role was created. And of course, now that we aren't able to put fans in stands for this season, that work becomes all the more important, because we still need to find a way to deliver an engaging and compelling experience to our fans without our core product offering that people know and love. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there too, in that we don't necessarily have to, we can focus more directly and more immediately on things like, global fan acquisition and global marketing, and breaking out of sort of this very hyper localized, very regional marketing for sports teams, because you're trying to attract people within the 150-mile radius who can come and see you, without that kind of important focus of butts and seats of, that KPI of needing to sell games this season. We do have time to do more thought work around, creating that compelling, digital experience that still is monetizable for us in the long term, but that allows us to expand our fan base beyond sort of more localized efforts. And you see a lot of successful work happening in that space with, European soccer and UEFA, and some of the work that they've done to build these global fan bases that have, a version of fandom that exists solely as a digital experience, both in a free and in a monetized capacity through loyalty and things like that.
I love that you tout it is a legacy brand, and that said, a lot of your segmented audience is a bit older, skewed older. That said, how do you help increase fandom, increase engagement, develop new KPIs to create new monetization models? I've seen that you've partnered with Postmates and you have home plates. I've seen some of the Zoom family things that some of the players are doing, which is awesome. But how do you help grow that fan base while keeping it very authentic? And also, to your point, keep money going on the money train.
Yeah. That's the $1 million question, that we're working hard towards answering. But I think a big thing for us, and even before, this season changed so fundamentally, in the off season in general, we were doing a lot of work within my group on new like storytelling opportunities, and bringing that kind of behind the scenes-esque content that, from the movie world that we know is so important to fans and that they really like to see it, and bring that more to brand building around our individual players in addition to with the team. So, from a content perspective, we're focusing on getting, our players to shoot day in the life footage of them at home, or visiting them in their hometown to learn about who they are, and, working to get players comfortable with doing videos for us solely for the purpose of putting on TikTok, right? That is part of a TikTok trend that has nothing to do with baseball. But, I think we're lucky in that we have players who love our fan base and want to be able to have that intimate relationship with them. So, we've been successful in that way. So a lot of what we're doing to engage younger consumers is really just customizing the content, and largely the digital and social content that we create for them, of, trying to build that legitimacy of, we understand that you aren't a consumer who's necessarily ever going to sit and watch a 4-hour baseball game start to finish on cable, like, for people who are teenagers or, in their 20s or at this point, frankly, anybody of any age, like that, it just is a lot of people are not that consumer anymore. So how do we try to really think about treating our social as this might be someone's only touch point to the game. So how do we, on the one hand, let them know what's happening and to keep up with the game if they're out of pocket right now and can't sit and watch the full broadcast, but also how do we make it fun and acknowledge that if you're the kind of fan who loves the team and wants to follow but doesn't want to sit down 162 days a year and commit 3 hours, like that's fine. And we want to be part of this umbrella. And how do we give you the snippets of kind of like, this is what you really need to know to take away to feel like you're still part of this fandom. And then you mentioned things like our home plate service, that again, I think that was a strategic initiative and something that we've long talked about doing, of sort of an additional 365 revenue stream. Of one of the things people love about any stadium experience is getting to have a Dodger dog or a Fenway Frank or whatever it is. And that's sort of like ballpark. I think we always had an assumption that people would maybe order that in their personal life and would want to have a Friday night, you're staying home to watch a game. Like, you can bring everything else to your door these days. Why not sort of some of your favorite stadium food? Mm-hmm. So we've talked about doing something like that for a while. And then, of course, the circumstances around COVID just accelerated the timeline of that. This felt like really the time to try. And we'd had an existing, strategic partnership with Postmates. So it's been great to be able to see that come to life. And especially with, us trying to acknowledge for our fans that fandom looks different this year. It's a nice perk to be able to offer to them, you can sit at home and watch the game with the Michelada and a Dodger dog. And it's not quite the real thing, but it's closer. And it's something that allows us to, we'll continue with it, of course, once we are inviting people back into the stands. So that's a nice takeaway of some of these innovations that we're trying to pursue because of the circumstances for this season. Long term are just benefits to our offering and allow us to have more touch points with fans in the long term.
Until then, we'll enjoy the cardboard cutouts. Those have been gaining a lot of great PR attention, I'd say.
Yeah, those are fun.
Yeah, those are really fun. That said, Caroline, when you're starting to develop a new initiative like home plates or, a day in the life or any of those initiatives, what are some of the challenges you face? And is there any advice that comes out of those challenges in your experience?
Certainly, yes, there are. One thing I think, and this is probably more on the content and social side than it is on the sort of venture side, but, there's a fine line between catering and appealing to one audience without necessarily doing harm with another. I feel like, there's a lot of work that we have to do to acknowledge that, we have a very loyal fan base and that has been with us and has been with the sport for a long time. And we never want them to feel left behind or left out of, the efforts that we're doing. So there's a bit of a tightrope of making sure that we're not going too far in any one direction, but also having to just kind of be true to our brand. And a lot of, I think, doing that successfully is understanding the segmentation of our audience and sort of who is where. And, there are things that we would do, even as things as simple as, we tend to use lyrics from songs as copy a lot. And just having to understand the differences in the demographics of our social platforms from channel to channel. There are certain use cases where, like, there have been times where I'll have to, reach out to my team and be like, hey, I don't know what that song is that was that caption, so maybe let's not put it on our Facebook channel, right? Like, so some of those things are just having a firm standing and grasp of the segmentation of our audience so that we can cater in a way that isn't sort of tone deaf or missing the mark with someone who's an important part of that audience. And I think that helps us avoid the challenge of over correcting in one direction or the other toward our either fan acquisition efforts or, appealing to our existing fan base.
I love that you mention really segmenting audiences and understanding where they are and how to speak to them cross-channel, cross-platform. That said, I'd love to talk a little bit about what are your current or future efforts when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? How does that affect marketing, your brand purpose, partnerships, hiring, et cetera?
Yeah, obviously this year has put the conversation surrounding diversity, equity and inclusion, rightfully in a very high place for where it should be, and it's really multifaceted. We as an organization pride ourselves on a long-standing commitment to diversity. We, of course, Jackie Robinson played on our team and broke the color barrier, and that's something that you can't come to Dodger Stadium and not see that represented. It's a big part of who we are, but we're not trying to rest on our laurels of something that happened, decades ago at this point. And the sport in general, I think, is coming together as it should be to focus on, issues of equity and inclusion across really all creeds. I think obviously this day is dedicated to women in sports, and it's no secret that women are underrepresented in the sports space, not only on the front office side in roles like mine, but in the ways that women are integrated into the actual on-field product. And, this year we've seen some great headlines around women making history as part of coaching staffs. Both teams actually, the 49ers and the Giants are in the Bay Area. But, for us, I think, we're focusing right now dually on behind the scenes doing work internally as a business to make sure that we are putting more focus and due focus on creating a more equitable workplace for, our employees, and have some, an action plan to go along with doing that. And then front facing from a fan perspective of just making sure that our values are known and said, loudly and clearly to our fan base, and that we are not staying in an objective place on, these really important moral issues. So, you'll see more to come from us, and kind of even just the bigger LA pro sports community. The Dodgers have partnered with the other 10 professional teams in Los Angeles to form a group called the Alliance, which is making a commitment to, a basically 5-year plan to continue to promote,
Wow.
racial and gender diversity within sports. So some of the details on that are still coming together, but it's exciting to be a part of. And I think just broadly as a consumer, it's been so refreshing and inspiring to see the number of brands who have come forward really unequivocally to make a strong statement about, what their values are, and not be teetering on this, well, we're going to be neutral because we don't want to alienate. I think brands being willing to, lose revenue, lose fans, and not be afraid of that blowback is critical. So I was happy to be able to, be on the right side of brands stepping forward and saying unequivocally, Black Lives Matter, and standing up for, creating positive change in the country.
Absolutely. I have to say it's been a huge part of my decision journey and why I joined MediaMonks. Just knowing that we're over 40% women in leadership roles, and we have so many nationalities across the globe. It's very inclusive. And even for Black Lives Matters, you mentioned in our last chat what a lovely office we have on Abbot Kinney in Los Angeles. And we were actually championed to carve out the words of George Floyd alongside our building and some of our neighbors as well. So I think you're right. You have to take a stand. You have to be vocal and stand on one side or the other. That said, Caroline, what do you say to young women who are thinking about potentially pursuing a career in marketing in sports and are unsure because of maybe they don't have the relevant experience? Maybe they have, they come from a traditional background. Maybe they're unsure how to get in. Maybe they're unsure about the stereotypes that it's a boys' club.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you would give them?
Yeah. And I shared a lot of that, nervous thinking when I was approached about the job. I certainly had my own preconceptions of what I assumed working in sports, and frankly, probably working in baseball in particular would mean in terms of that. I was really afraid in a lot of ways to be coming in as new to sports, generally relatively young, in a newly created position where there can often be tension about someone coming into a new role. I think I had a lot of anxiety before I started, and even some reservations that kept me from, originally I was like, I don't know if I'm even going to want to interview for that. But I did some research on the organization and just the work that they have done over the years in promoting things like, we've been one of the first teams to have a Pride Night, and I felt comforted by kind of what I saw from the organization, and was so pleasantly surprised when I started that the things I had been fearful of in terms of experiencing, any sort of ageism or gender kind of really didn't happen. But I did need to kind of remind myself that the thing that I think I was most probably self-conscious about was coming in as someone with a relatively limited knowledge set as it relates to the intricacies of the sport and also the history of the team, since I'm not from Los Angeles and didn't grow up this diehard fan, but had to realize like that was exactly why I was hired. I think organizationally they were looking for a pretty neutral perspective and fresh eyes, and someone who, was coming in to represent a casual fan. It's probably good if you fit into that demo. So I have to just kind of in the beginning really tell myself day over day, like, the thing that you're seeing as a weakness is actually probably your greatest asset if you can harness it and like own it in a way that you're not feeling embarrassed. So I would go, like, some of my early days, someone would be having a conversation about someone who's definitely storied within the franchise, and I'd be laughing as if I knew who that was and like frantically Googling to try to catch up. You always have to do that in any job at some moments. But eventually I just kind of got to the point of being like, I don't know who that is. Can you fill me in? And I think it's a helpful reminder, for us throughout the organization that some people are just joining us on their Dodger fandom, and we need to be smart about keeping that casual fan in mind in how we program, because you don't want someone to like come into our ecosystem and then feel excluded because they haven't been part of it. So it was easier for me to do my job and represent, that aspect of the business because I had that. So the advice that I think I would give is, if you're feeling self-conscious or doubtful of something that maybe would make you unqualified, but you were hired for that role, it's probably exactly the thing that you should be leaning into in sort of an unapologetic way, because it can be a strength.
I love that you said, and do it in an unapologetic way. That's awesome. Before I start to take questions from the audience, I would love to ask you, what is your legacy? What do you want people to know, think, feel, say about you? And how are you helping to obviously manifest that?
Yeah, I love that question. I think as a human being, my hope for the legacy that I'd like to leave is just to do more good than harm, and to do as much good as I can, and make positive impacts in little ways and big ways, and whatever that might be. But to find ways to make positive impact, I think, is something that I try to be mindful about, in my personal life. But from a professional standpoint, I very much think, like, I know that I am where I am because I had an incredible mentor in my first boss who was literally like goals. Like, from the minute I met her, I was like, I want to be that. Like, she made it very clear to me, and not only in just supporting her team, but she manifested, like, she was the embodiment of being a really successful woman who was well liked and didn't do it in any sort of difficult way, and like, kind of killed the world with kindness and her own intelligence, and was rewarded for that by being really successful in her career. So I think professionally, because I benefited so much from having someone who set an example, but then also opened the door for women to follow her, I'd like to continue that. If I can be that example for somebody and then sort of help to open the door along the way, that's really all that I could ask for in terms of a professional legacy.
Super inspiring. And I think that that speaks volumes, combined with the advice you give folks maybe trying to enter the sports marketing field. Very, very valuable. When it comes to perhaps you talking to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Sleep more, probably.
Right?
Yeah, oh God, I hadn't thought about that one. Yeah, I think just trust your gut. I always would have some times in my, sort of early days of having a thought in a meeting, and in that moment where you're waiting for the right time to contribute, and then somehow 5 minutes go by and you've missed it, and you sort of dwell for the rest of the day of like, ugh, if I had just spoken up. I think the advice I would have given myself was maybe earlier than I kind of had found that voice and bravery to sort of, go grab my own seat at the table, would have been to just trust your gut and trust if you're having a thought and you feel very strongly about it in a conversation, it's probably a good thought, and try to like quiet those voices of, oh, are people going to perceive this as a stupid comment, or maybe I'm misinterpreting the situation. Like, let that be the case if that's the case. But I personally could have benefited, I think, from being a little bit more confident in my own experience, earlier. And to sleep more definitely would have been helpful.
I love the sleep more bit. I think we can all tell ourselves that even currently. A question from the audience, Caroline. What trends in consumer behavior are of particular importance to you and marketers now?
I think fragmented viewing is, and obviously, really sort of competitive environment for attention in general. But I think that we're past the days of talking about, second screen interaction, and are really more talking about like 8 screen multi interaction. People are jumping so quickly from one thing to the other. And I think that being able to, really understand the nuances of fragmented viewing, not only just generally between kind of the big bucket mediums, right, of like linear versus digital, but like there's so much nuance within the digital ecosystem, and people expect such a different product from, one place to another. And I think that manifests in things like, having a really sound gaming strategy. I think that's something we're still working on at the league level, but people expect to be able to have a catered, customized touch point with a brand anywhere that they are, and those platforms are, ever increasing. So I think understanding and embracing, tailored content planning is sort of critical for being kind of best practices of how brands sort of authentically and organically like enter various channels and ecosystems.
You're absolutely right. And I think the key there is what you said, authenticity, right? Meeting people where they are. Content should be different across platforms, cross social channels. We call that at the Monk side fit for format, and really personalized, really engaging content in an always on fashion. But again, it should resonate. It should feel raw. It should feel authentic, and even evoke some sort of sentiment, right? That the brands that are doing that sentiment across user journeys. So that's pretty awesome. Another question is, how have or how will influencers and new social media platforms become part of your overall digital media mix?
Yeah, influencers for us has been a challenge this year in particular because, historically, we've been really lucky in that we're a pro team in Los Angeles, and we have a lot of connections and relationships with not only digital native influencers, but just general celebrities as well. And in the past, I think we've done a really good job of, leveraging our product and our experience in a way to get, social coverage from celebrities. We have a digital influence manager who does a lot of time outreaching to celebrities, and is very strategic in how we put together, will give tickets and access, or, you know, some sort of kind of perk within the stadium, and are able to generate a lot of, you know, coverage and influencer like earned impressions through just being able to, you know, host influencers and celebrities within our stadium. And this year, I think, has challenged that sort of slam dunk of a process. So I think longer term, you know, we're going to need to reinvent it. But something that we were doing, you know, in 2019 that was successful, that I thought was actually really smart, and that we you know, wanted to continue to lean into, was using influencers as a way to, through kind of barter scenarios, like help us recruit new audiences for some of our more affinity-based programming. So, for example, we do a Korean Heritage Night as part of our broader theme night programming. We had last year a YouTube influencer approach us who wanted to shoot a mukbang video at the stadium, stadium food.
Yes.
And it was perfect. You know, we were able to arrange for her to be able to come on an off day and film the video from the field. And we gave her a custom code for her to be able to invite her fans to a meet and greet at our Korean Heritage Night month. So for us, it was, you know, win-win, in that she was able to get the location for her content that she wanted, and we were able to use her as a bring new audiences into, you know, the Dodger umbrella in a way that was, you know, kind of catered to something that would appeal to them. We had a number of fans who were first-time game attendees who came and had a meet and greet with her and then watched the game. And, you know, the goal would be then to be able to go back to them and have them come out for more games. So I think influencers play a really important role in our overall conversation around segmented marketing, and even just, you know, in our outreach to women and younger consumers who might be looking for a different experience. You know, we can use influencers to push the message of coming to a baseball game and having a couple beers on a Sunday afternoon is really fun. And, you know, that's a different message than what we would push to our season ticket members, or, you know, people who are diehard fans of the sport.
Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense. Last question. What trends in consumer behavior are of particular importance to you and marketers now, you think? Live stream?
Yeah. Well, and now I'd say, importantly, digital fan touch points in broadcast. You know, that's, I think we're setting ourselves up, but, you know, for something we have to keep going with. But across various pro leagues right now, there's a lot of innovation happening in virtual fan experiences and integrating them into broadcast, into the actual stadium. Things like our Zoom parties, things like NBA virtual fans, you know, the KBO had sort of started with the virtual fans. These are things that are going to become an expectation at a certain point of consumers, even when, you know, things go back to normal, whatever that looks like. You know, we need to be, these are all changing better. And if we can move forward with the ability to house 56,000 people in our stadium, but also have people buy in or be asked into a virtual fan experience, like, that's a good thing. So I think that those changes in consumer behavior, just as it relates to consuming sports content this year, are things that we particularly are paying attention to as we start planning for 21 and really just the next 5 years.
And that's the strategy, right? Is not only planning for the next 6 months, but really thinking ahead into 2 to 5 year plans again. It sounds like your digital transformation is already well on way. But of course, if you want to expand that ecosystem into live streaming and AR and VR components, that's sort of the things that you need to map out. And shameless plug, when you need that map out partner.
And where to find, you know, right where your offices are. So.
Caroline, this has been awesome. I see Nora interjecting soon, but I just wanted to say this was an awesome conversation. I think the advice was key that you've provided to watchers, and it was really an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciated the time. It was a pleasure to be here with you guys today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. Caroline, of course, I have another question. No, but I was so interested in hearing you talking about the innovation and how you create new habits in the digital space. We work a lot with that. And I think it's super interesting to kind of also figure out, and I'm curious to know your thoughts when it comes to, creating new experiences and trying to maybe stay away from just translating the physical experience to something digital. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's no holds bar right now. I think we're really trying to be okay with taking chances and okay with things not working right now, because, we're in a really unknown moment. And I 100% agree with you. I think that, there's an opportunity to try things that exist uniquely for, digital fans and digital consumers. So, I think we're continuing to, champion any idea, big or small, and give it a whirl and see what happens. And are, of course, looking to our peers and the great work that's being done by a lot of the other women that, this group will hear from today and their organizations. But, sky feels like the limit a little bit for this season, because it's so unprecedented that we really don't have anything to lose. So we might as well try and see if we can uncover some sort of gems and some really strong new best practices for how to do things moving forward.
That's the spirit. I totally agree. Also, if you want to go back to trying to target those who actually would want to look at a game for 3 hours, I tell you, like, if you're madly in love with a baseball fan, you will watch the full Yankee season, every single game for 3 hours, even when there's rain delay.
Yes. That's
a very small target group. It is. Thank you so much. And congrats to the start of the season as well.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. Great to see you guys.
Appreciate your time. Great insights. And while we're actually approaching halftime of today's talks, I hope that you are all enjoying the very different perspectives and experiences that are shared here today. I'd say, like, this somehow struggling business, sports have been very affected by COVID. I think it's so